YouTube, welcome back to my channel. Today we're here to share some books. This past week we've been talking a lot about amplifying black voices and amplifying black female voices, and this is one black female voice that does not need to be amplified because she will let you know about it herself. This past week on June 5th, Breonna Taylor would have been 27 years old, but her life was prematurely ended when she was the victim of a police shooting. And so on June 5th, there was talk about doing something to remember Breonna Taylor and to celebrate her 27th birthday. One suggestion was to share 27 books by black female authors. And so even though I'm a little bit late, I thought I would share with you 27 books written by black women from my own bookshelves and do my part in recommending black women's voices to you and talking a little bit about some of the black women that have influenced me through their writing. So these are not in any particular order, except that I'm just going to share these books with you as they appear on my shelves or as I pull them down. First one that I wanted to show is Bernardine Evaristo's Girl, Woman, Other. This is one of my newest acquisitions. Bernardine Evaristo is the first black woman to have won the Booker Prize, and she shared the prize last year with Margaret Atwood for The Testaments. And this is a novel that integrates the stories of multiple women. I don't know if they're all black, but this story I think is set in London as well as, I don't know if it's London. The story is set in England as well as other places around the world. I think there is even a Caribbean setting. So this is one that I've heard some people are reading now as we're celebrating Read Caribbean this month. But this is a book I think that we should just read at any point, just, you know, as we're thinking about amplifying the black voice. Again, first black woman to have won the Booker Prize, Bernardine Evaristo. That alone is enough to be celebrated. I had a couple of books here that this little one dropped. Stop pushing my books on the ground, little girl. Okay, Jamaica Kincaid by Jamaica Kincaid is the author. This is Annie John. This is right now the only one of her books that I have on my shelves. I own a couple of other books, but I'm not sure where they are. They might have been lent out to people. Jamaica Kincaid is an immigrant from Antigua. She moved to the United States as a young girl and, well, as a young woman. Hey, what is happening? She moved to the United States as a young woman and changed her name. And so Jamaica Kincaid is not her given name, but this is a name that she thought reflected this change in her circumstances. And it's ironic that even though she has this new persona as a woman living in the United States, a lot of her writings center around her early life and lessons that she would have learned and people that she would have observed as a person living in the Caribbean. This is no different. This is about the relationship between a young girl and her mother. And I talked about this one in a previous video where I try to mention some books by Caribbean authors. Boy Snowbird, this is the only book that I own by Helen Oyeyemi, even though I've read other things from her. Helen Oyeyemi is of African descent. I want to say she's from Nigeria, but I'm not sure right now. But she is based in Prague. She lives in Europe, even though she is from Africa. This is Helen Oyeyemi right here. Some of her novels center on fairy tales and speculative fiction, and this one is no different. This is a little bit of a retelling of the Snow White story, but it dives into relationships between mothers and daughters, or mother figures and daughters, and perception of women in the wider society. So this I thought was a really interesting book. There has been a lot of criticism about some things that she included, some social issues that she included, but I can't talk about that too much because it's kind of a spoiler. But it's one that I recommend that you try if you haven't read Helen Oyeyemi before. She's an author that I think that you should definitely try. She also writes short stories, and I think it is possible that her short stories have been more successfully received than her novels, but again, that is based on your opinion. Sedella Marley adapted one of her father's songs. Bob Marley has a song don't worry about a thing, because every little thing is going to be all right. Um, his daughter Sedella Marley adapted the song for a children's storybook where it shows a young boy going through life. Yes, a young boy going through life and not being discouraged by any of the circumstances that he is facing. This is a really good book to read with your child. This was a gift that we got for the baby when she was born, and we've read it several times already, and we're probably going to be reading it several more times this month alone. Yes, you like that book. Lupita Nyong'o. This is Lupita Nyong'o. She is an actress known for her role in 12 Years a Slave by Solomon Northup, and more recently Black Panther. She wrote Silhouette, which is another picture book which talks about color and colorism, how even within the Black community there is a stigma of dark-skinned, being really dark-skinned, and the perception that that makes a person less. So that was Lupita Nyong'o's Silhouette. Maya Angelou shared her memoir in 7 parts. This is the first of her memoir, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. I did a read along of this book here on the channel, which I'll link down below. If you have never read this book and want to hear me read it aloud, you can check that out. This is Maya Angelou's life, raw and uncut as she lived it, and it is fascinating the things that this woman endured and experienced and thrived through. Jacqueline Woodson, she is a contemporary writer. She writes a lot of middle grade books, but she also writes for adults, and this is one of her middle grade novels that won her Newbery Honor recognition. After Tupac and Dee Foster is about a trio, I think, of girls living in the inner city and how they're impacted by the music of Tupac Shakur, and also just how they learn their kind of coming of age story as they learn from seeing how their mothers live and the lessons that they're learning about adulthood from watching the adults in their lives and comparing that to, of course, what they're hearing in the media. Fascinating story. I read this one a couple of years ago. Roxane Gay, this is her short story collection, Difficult Women, where she fictionalizes a lot of experiences that women survive through. But Roxane Gay's story, her memoir, is just as fascinating as any fiction that she's ever crafted. As a young girl, she was abused, and she internalized a lot of the pain and wore it in the weight of her body. And her memoir, Hunger, A Memoir of My Body, is enthralling and provocative and heartbreaking. I recommend Hunger, the memoir, even above this one, but just anything that you read from Roxane Gay is going to impact you in some way, I believe. She is also of Caribbean heritage in that her parents are from Haiti, but she herself, of course, is an American. Yes, like you. Your mother is from the Caribbean, but you are an American woman. Yes, we know. The Confessions of Franny Langton by Sarah Collins. This is another recent acquisition. This is a fictional rendition of a woman's story, a woman who in the, is it 1700s? 1800s, not 17. In the 1800s, was accused of a crime, and she needs to defend herself. I haven't read this one yet. It's on my TBR for later this month, so I'll tell you more about that when I read it. All right, darling. Let's put you down. The Warmth of Other Suns is Isabel Wilkerson's narrative nonfiction story about the Great Migration as African Americans moved from the South, seeking better opportunities in the north of the United States and in the west of the United States. And she uses a few case studies, a few real life people's lives to show the change in circumstance, some of it better, some of it worse, some of it just a change in physical location, but a lot of the same experiences. This is a fascinating read. It is a huge book, but if you haven't heard too much about the Great Migration, because there isn't a lot of focus on this in the curriculum in schools, this is a book that I think everyone should read just to see the vestiges of slavery that African Americans have worn for so long, even after the Abolition Act. I couldn't list Black voices without sharing my own Black voice. This is a short story collection that I wrote and published a few years ago. It's complicated, short stories about long relationships. That's me, Karen Wright, and this book is available on Amazon if you are interested in reading my work. Again, short stories about lots of different kinds of relationships. There are relationships between men and women, between parent and child, and the relationship that you need to develop and cultivate with yourself. So I thought it was pretty profound. It is one of the books that has impacted me the most because it is the book that made me into a published author. So yeah, that is me. Shameless plug, my own Black voice being portrayed. Ghana Must Go by Taiye Selassie. This is one of the few books in this list that I haven't read. That's not a new acquisition. But I think the story is about a family returning to Africa on the death of the patriarch of the family and discovering some of the family secrets, working on family dynamic drama. So that's one that I haven't read yet, but ooh, okay. Don't expose mommy's secrets to the internet, okay? From Harvey River, a memoir of my mother and her island by Lorna Goodison. Lorna Goodison is a Jamaican writer. Okay, we're gonna put her down. Pause. From Harvey River is Lorna Goodison's story about her mother's life. And through writing about her mother, she's also sharing the story of her own relationship with her mother. And so we learned some things about Lorna Goodison herself, and she is a media personality in Jamaica. Her sister is also a big radio personality in Jamaica when I was growing up, Barbara Goudon. And this one gives you a little bit of a look into that life in Jamaica, the non-celebrity, non-dance hall kind of country living. It evokes nostalgia just reading these words, and I'd love to share this book with everyone. Other books, I'm not gonna pick. Lorraine Hansberry's Raised in the Sun is very well known because the movie version of this became very popular, I think, as it was portrayed by Sidney Poitier. But when this play was first produced in 1959, Lorraine Hansberry won. She broke some records, I think. It says on the back, not only was it a pioneering work by an African-American playwright, Lorraine Hansberry's play was also a radically new representation of Black life, one that was resolutely authentic, fiercely unsentimental, and unflinching in its vision of what happens to people whose dreams are constantly deferred. This is a short read. It is only about 150 pages. Yeah, 151 exactly, and it is one that I highly recommend if you haven't read it. White Teeth by Zadie Smith was first published in the year 2000, and I read it not long afterwards. So I've had this copy for a while and been planning to reread it because I'm not sure how this story would impact me now that I'm, 20 years older. But this I thought was a fantastic debut, and Zadie Smith's career has gone astronomical levels since this. But I still recommend her writing, whether this book or others of her writing are more your speed. She writes fiction. This is her novel, but she's also published a few books of essays, so she also has nonfiction works as well. Hi, mommy's soon finished. We Need New Names by Novalet Bulawayo was shortlisted for the Booker Prize in 2014. This is a Zimbabwean writer who, since I read this book, I've been waiting for her next read. This is so impactful. It talks about the life of children in Zimbabwe, some of the hardships that they face, but she travels to the United States following one character who was able to migrate, and just kind of seeing some of the struggles that continue in their lives even when they change location, you know, what it's like, the life of the immigrant. There's some tabs here. This blue tab was back when I was tabbing blue for when the book made me blue. And so this is the point in the book where I broke down and cried, and I recommend this book for that reason exactly. Sing Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward. I think National Book Award winner. I have 2 copies of this book, so this is the one that I bought after she won the book award. Jesmyn Ward has published several books. This is only one of her books that I've read so far, but this was so profound as it tells the story of a boy growing up in his family and what he learns from the men in his family versus what he learns from the women in his family. And yeah, you know, in this one, I thought she did this very interesting thing where she portrayed a young woman who put the man in her life above the needs of her children, which is not the story that I like. It's not the story that I appreciate reading about because I know about the sacrifices of mothers. But I thought she did this in such a haunting way that I'm still thinking about this story 2 years after I read it. And so even though I didn't necessarily like that as a storyline, I think that this author's writings are just so impactful that I think you should pick it up. And then I have 3 books by Toni Morrison. This year, I'm trying to read all of Toni Morrison's books. I'm a little bit behind in my schedule, but Toni Morrison's writings, they speak for themselves. These are 3 of her novels. This, I think, is one of the strongest books that I have ever read. And this is probably one of the most impactful stories that I've ever read. This I haven't read yet. Or have I? No, I haven't read this book. But Beloved is the story of a young woman who escapes slavery and is willing to sacrifice the lives of her children just so that they don't have to grow up under the whip of the slave master. The Bluest Eye traces a story of a young girl who's been told so often that she's ugly that she internalizes that message and starts to live it out in her interactions. Oh my goodness, these stories are so profound. Toni Morrison, of course, is the quintessential name in Black voices, but of course, you know, we have a lot of other women who also have stories to tell. And so, as a segue, here's another voice, The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abi DeRay. This is a young African woman. This is her debut novel about a young girl in Africa and her desire to have her own voice and to have her voice be heard, even though the men in her life, and with the exception of her mother, a lot of the other women in her life trying to silence her. Speaking of books that have been influential by African writers, we have Americana by Chimamanda and Ngozi Adichie. And in this one, she talks about the life of the African immigrant in the United States and compares that to the life of the African immigrant in the United Kingdom, and also compares the struggles that female immigrants have versus the struggles of male immigrants, with some of the maybe more stereotypical injustices that are done against different genders. But fascinating story about the life of the immigrant. And it's interesting because within the African diaspora, there's discussion about where people fall in that spectrum, whether they're Africans from the African continent or African Americans or Afro-Caribbeans. But for a lot of people, we're just people of African descent. So this is a really important Black voice as well. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie her books have been very widely read, widely received, and well loved. Yeah, Jessie, Homecoming. This is another very influential book by an author of African descent, and in this one she traces just what I've been talking about, the African diaspora as it is lived out by people who have had very different kinds of experiences. So she uses two sisters' stories. One of those sisters remains on the African continent, and we trace her genealogy, and the other sister sold into slavery comes to the West, and we trace her genealogy and compare the lives of these two sets of families from the same family tree, what kind of experiences they have. And this was a fascinating read, oh my word. So this is Jessie. I think she has a new book coming out soon that I want to read. So that's Homegoing. Homegoing. Other books by this is all I have left to talk about. Alice Walker, The Color Purple. This won the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award when it was first published in, when Alice Walker's book get published? 1970. This is a book that if you read it now, these stories are just as haunting as they were 50 years ago now. Again, we're following the story of two sisters and the experiences that they have. One remains in the South and is married to a very abusive man, and the other sister goes to Africa as a missionary, and we follow the relationship that they have, even as it continues without them having face-to-face interaction. But we trace their experiences through letters that they write to each other, whether those letters are delivered or it is just them recording their thoughts. This is a haunting read because no matter what your background, when you read about the things that this fictional character endures, and you know that this, even though this story is fiction, that it is a parable for, the lives that some people live. Haunting read. Alice Walker did a lot to amplify the Black voice in this book, and the fact that this won the Pulitzer and it's a book that is widely studied makes it that much more important. I'm embarrassed to say I never finished reading this book. I got this arc a year and a half ago. One Person, No Vote, How Voter Suppression is Destroying Our Democracy. I started reading this and I just had so many conversations that burgeoned out of this that I never finished. But I'm taking responsibility now, and I'm going to be returning to this book and reading it in its entirety very soon. Carol Anderson is the Charles Howard Candler Professor and Chair of African American Studies at Emory University. This is an important book to read right now as we're talking about power and how power can be used to leverage change in our society, and what we're going to do with that power. The Yellow House by Sarah Broom won the National Book Award in its nonfiction category recently, and this is a book that I read a few months ago with my buddy read group, Doris and Heidi and Patrice. And yeah, Sarah Broom tells the story of her family growing up in New Orleans and how their lives were impacted by Hurricane Katrina, but not just the storm, but the mismanagement of resources by the administration in the months and years following. If you haven't read too much about that story, this is a book that I recommend that you pick up. And whether or not you think you know what happened around the Hurricane Katrina event, then this is a story that I think should be read as well, just for comparison, and see whether or not you know the whole story. And this is another one that I haven't yet read. This is Tiffany Haddish's memoir. It's entitled The Last Black Unicorn. I bought this at a book sale, still has the sticker on it. But, Tiffany Haddish, well, her picture is here, but it's also here. She is a celebrity. And so I don't consume a lot of TV media. And so I'm not very familiar with her work, and maybe that's why I haven't read the book yet. But she does talk about her transition from growing up in South Central LA, growing up poor, and learning that she had the gift of comedy, and following that to becoming a stand-up comedian, following it to becoming a movie star in her own right. And so this is a book that I'm happy to own, even though I haven't read it yet. So I apologize for that. Let's see, I think I've shared with you 27 books, but just in case I haven't, here's another book that is my newest acquisition, and it is so new that I don't yet have a copy. So I'm going to insert a clip of it here because the book is being delivered today or tomorrow. Patsey by Nicole Dennis Benn. Nicole Dennis Benn is a Jamaican author. She now lives in the United States. And her previously published book, Here Comes the Sun, is one that I read and didn't love when I read it, just because a lot of the things that happen to the characters in Nicole Dennis Benn's work are negative. And I just wanted some positive affirmation. I wanted her to write something in that book that said good things happen to people. But the fact is that as much as you wish for good things to happen, it doesn't mean that it happens all the time. And so Nicole Dennis Benn's work is representative of the reality that for a lot of people who live in oppressed circumstances, who live in third world countries, who live in come from impoverished backgrounds, or live in disadvantaged and disenfranchised circumstances in general, that for them there is no good. There isn't enough good to make it into their stories. And so having revisited the story in that first book, I have come to a better appreciation for the fact that this author is representing the life of the Black woman, the struggle of the Black woman, the struggle of the Black West Indian or Caribbean or African American woman who feels that injustice every day, and who's probably wakes up every morning wishing today's a day where things get good, and still maybe at the end of the day going back to bed another night praying maybe tomorrow. And so I bought her newest book, Patsey, and it's on its way to me. So I don't yet have a copy, so I'll insert a picture. Like I said, that's my list. Those are 27 books that I have read or own. 27 books by Black women. And this is me trying to amplify the voice of the Black woman as we think about Breonna Taylor losing her life, losing her voice, and all the other Black women around the world who for a long time have not been able to speak up, have not been able to talk about their experience. And so I'm doing my part to not just let these women share their voices with me, but also share their voices with you, as I encourage you to pick up these books or other books by Black female authors today, tomorrow, sometime. Amplify the Black voice, amplify the Black female voice in your own life, in your own space, and let's do everything we can to make this world a little bit more equal. Thanks so much for watching this video. Give me a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to see more. I'll be back soon with another video. I'm wearing my shirt representing St. Kitts and Nevis because I'm going to be back soon to talk about other books that I'm recommending for the Caribathon Reading Challenge. The readathon starts on Thursday, and so I'd love to chat with you in the comments if you're planning to participate, or of course, skip over and watch the next video if it's up by the time you watch this one. For now, thanks so much for watching. Until next time, happy reading. Bye.